That's how I got here. And this is
Oh, okay.
actually the first interview that I'm doing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So on my platform, I talk
That'll
about
teach
black
you.
issues. I'm sorry, what you
As
say,
my
sir?
great uncle said, that'll teach you.
That'll teach you. Yeah, I said if you wanna, I said I just gotta throw myself in there and I gotta take a chance. I gotta take a chance, and that's what I did. And I'm just, I'm thrilled that like I said before, that you gave me the opportunity to to have a conversation. So my name is Tawaga Bar. I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Tawaga Bar. Uh, I I have a platform called Black Authentic Truth where I actually just talk about history, talk about current issues with Black people that all Black people from different walks of life or beliefs could agree on. So that's basically, the what my platform is about. And I'm really intrigued by history. So um figures like you or people like you, that's what intrigues me. I gravitate to people who are what I call historians, or just people that love the history of Black people. So that's a little bit about me.
Very good.
Mhm. That's how I got here, and this is
Oh, okay.
actually the first interview that I'm doing. On,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So on my platform, I talk
That'll
about
teach
Black
you.
issues. I'm sorry, what'd you
As
say, sir?
my great uncle said, that'll teach you.
That'll teach you. Yeah, I said if you wanna, I said I just gotta throw myself in there and I gotta take a chance. I gotta take a chance, and that's what I did. And I'm just, I'm thrilled that like I said before, that you gave me the opportunity to have a conversation. So my name is Tawaga Bar. I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Tawaga Bar. Uh, I I have a platform called Black Authentic Truth where I actually just talk about history, talk about current issues with Black people that all Black people from different walks of life or beliefs could agree on. So that's basically, the what my platform is about. And I'm really intrigued by history. So um figures like you or people like you, that's what intrigues me. I gravitate to people who are what I call historians, or just people that love the history of Black people. So that's a little bit about me.
Very good.
Mhm. So before we get into the book, there's some things that I do want, like just like a basic,
Okay.
a little bit about you as far as like upbringing,
Okay.
how you came up and things of that nature.
Well, I was raised in a little town of 800 people in
Mm,
Alabama called New Brockton. I
okay.
went to a school called Tuskegee, and after Tuskegee, I went to New York, start to work as a photographer.
Mm,
And I didn't study photography because you couldn't study photography then. There were no schools for it. You had to mentor under some other photographer.
oh,
And I really didn't know I wanted to be a photographer until one day at school at Tuskegee. I went to this house of the university photographer, an old guy named P.H. Polk. Maybe he wasn't that old. Maybe he was in his 50s. And I went to pick up some photographs that he owed me and the student newspaper because we were on deadline and he had missed the deadline. And that meant that I had to wait till he processed the film, made the prints, and then take them to the printer. But in the process of being curious, I'm looking around the studio and I see hidden behind these curtains were these images of poor people, or rather farmers from the 30s. But they
okay.
were very dignified. And it made me realize that the image of Black people in the media that we had been exposed to was always negative. I mean, at the time, Ebony Johnson Publishing was the only difference. But these negative images that the local white people made of us always reflected what was in their heart.
Mhm.
In their heart, when it comes to us, was full of hate and disdain. And it made me, but I felt that was their problem. I've learned something now that I can make my own pictures, and of what? And the thing I decided I want to make pictures of, based on these photographs of old people, were the old people in my life that I really loved. And the two people who I loved the most in my life was my great uncle March 4th McGowan, who lived to die at 108, and his
Wow.
sister, and Shug Lampley, who lived to die, I think she died at 99. And growing up, I realized that they, unlike my mother, who had her picture made every year because she was a school teacher, having a photograph made cost money.
Mm,
And there was no white photographer that they knew that you could go to their studio anyway. So it was something that was just beyond their reach.
mhm.
But they had two things on their walls. One was the Farmer's Almanac, because they were farmers. It was a community that planted and raised cotton, peanuts, sugarcane,
Okay.
tomatoes, big gardens, things like that, corn.
Mm,
So they had the Farmer's Almanac on that wall, and they had a picture, a reproduction of Jesus Christ. These are the only
mm,
two things on my relative's wall. So when I saw this picture, it made me think that one, they are a perfect candidate for a picture like this, but most importantly, they're also a perfect candidate for um, using their wall to show their sense of worthiness, their sense of agency. And in order for
mm,
that to happen, a picture of them had to be produced. I was not a photographer. I knew I did not have the money as a student to hire the photographer that was in front of me to go make these pictures. And I asked him if he would teach me. And after some discussion, said, okay, come by and we'll talk about my pictures. And I will go by his place once a week. And he would have pictures littered out over the place. And I would ask him questions about, well, how did you do this? And who's this? And he sort of demystified the process of photographing.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me a year and a half later to save up enough money to get actually my second camera. I bought my first camera for $100 in Manhattan, Kansas, a Russian camera called a Praktika. But it was a screw mount, which is good, but if it unscrews, the picture is not sharp.
Okay.
And I saved up enough money to buy a Leica mount, which is called a bayonet camera lens. And I went home with that camera because not only did it have a bayonet lens, but it had a light meter, which at the time was very important because I couldn't read light. My mentor, Mr. Polk, could walk into a space and he could read the light right away, but he's had 40 years of experience. So I needed help. So I went home and I started making these pictures of my aunts and uncles. And then I came back and Mr. Polk processed the film for me. He made a print and I've had it framed and took it home. And the moment that it took me a year and a half to see, and that moment was seeing the faces of my great aunts and my great uncle light up when they see that I have put a picture up on their wall that's of themselves.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. I didn't mean to stop you. I didn't mean to.
That's okay. So that's why I picked up the camera. It had nothing to do with anything other than just the love of my family members and seeing that there's something missing, that reflects themselves. And that what reflects themselves affects themselves, and then, Elijah Muhammad says, we are what we consume. And if we consume negative imagery about ourselves, negative narratives about ourselves, no wonder it encourages, it stifles our growth. So after that, I was also involved in the civil rights movement in Tuskegee. From time to time, we would go over to Montgomery and protest the governor, George Wallace. And I came back after one of those marches and I looked at the TV news and I looked at the newspapers, and it suddenly hit me that the pictures did not show us as American citizens petitioning our government. The pictures, however, showed us as, if you didn't know who you were looking at, it showed us as potential thugs, arsonists, and rapists. And that taught me a very important lesson. It taught me that a picture never lies about the photographer. If the photographer has love in their heart, they can't really make a bad picture of you. But if a photographer has hate in their heart, then every picture will be bad.
Wow.
So I said, okay, well, what can I do? Now that I've realized what the power of the media is and how we have been affected by this propaganda for so long, what do I do about it? I have a choice. I could take a poster and walk out in front of the WSFA television in Montgomery station or the Montgomery Advertiser and say, you're racist. Well, that's nothing new for them to understand, to hear. But to me, that was a limited approach. So I thought, how do I vault over these people? And how do I get to the national stage? Because because of the civil rights movement, there were some great photographs being made by white photographers, Charles Moore and others of the SCLC. And they were quite effective. You probably remember the picture in Birmingham of the children being hosed with the fire hose.
Yes, I do.
Great photographs. But my thing was not to look at the confrontation. My thing was, what are they fighting about? What are they having this confrontation about? And what this is about is the wealth that's at home, back home, with our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents. And I wanted to show that, to show our sense of worth, because the three things I analyzed, the three things that are missing And the image of our people mostly is the issues of decency, dignity, and a virtuous character. So I had to learn how to be a very good photographer. I had to learn how to be competitive. So I went to New York in search of, during the summer of '69, between semesters, looking for a teacher. I didn't know who this teacher would be, how I would find it, by him or her. But I went to a newsstand and I picked up all the magazines that displayed photographs very well. And then being a business major, I realized that you look at the masthead and to see who the editors are to find out who the picture editor is. And I did that. And I found the picture editor and I called different picture editors up and I start off by saying, look, I'm a student from Alabama trying to learn how to be a photographer, but I'm not calling you looking for a job. I need to learn how to become a better photographer. And you see the best photographers. Would you look at my work? I brought a little portfolio with me of maybe 15, 20 images. Would you look at my work and tell me what's the gap between the great photographers you see and what I do? Well, most people were, some people were kind, but none of them were helpful. I learned also that picture editors are not photographers because they really couldn't talk. They handle paper. They don't handle the making of an image. And one day I'm at Look magazine and talking to the picture editor, Sam Young, a young man. I mean, it's probably at 30s, mid 30s. And he, couldn't really give me any instructions. And we were talking and just fortuitously, the door opens and this short bald-headed man sticks his head at the door and he looks at Sam and starts firing off some stuff to Sam. And Sam straightened up in his chair, which told me it was Sam's boss. And then he finally, after he finishes giving Sam his instructions, he looks at me and he said, well, Sam, what's this? So Sam said, well, it's this student from Tuskegee, wants to be a photographer. He's trying to learn. So the guy says to Sam, he said, okay, when you finish, send him into my office. So he closed the door. I looked at Sam and Sam looked at me and we both knew we were finished. So he says to me, when you go out in the hallway, turn right in the end of the hall. That's Mr. Rothstein's office. So I said, okay. So I did it. I get into his office, sit down, and he looks at me and he said, well, who are you? Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. What do you want to, be a photographer? What do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't like the image of my people in the media. And I want to change that because the three missing elements are decency, dignity, and virtuous character. And he leans back in his chair and he said, wow. He said, that's a pretty tall order. I said, well, it might be, but it's the only one I have. He said, okay, let me see what you have, what your pictures look like. So I let him see my pictures and he looks at them and he takes out 4 pieces of paper and starts moving around the image. And what I'd learned that day, what he was doing was cropping. So as he would crop a picture, he had left an aperture. And so he said, come, take a look. And I went and I was amazed at a great picture. I said, wow, that's a great picture. He said, yeah, but you didn't know it. Because had you known it, you would have zeroed in on this and you would have excluded these other things that compete with it. And I said, wow, okay, what's another picture? So we went through maybe 15. We must have talked for about an hour just going through. And I realized this is the teacher I need. This is the teacher I've been looking for. So I'd say to him, well, can I go try a practice assignment to see if I'm learning what you're telling me? He said, sure. I said, okay, well, I'll be back in a few days because I have to process the film. Because as a student, I didn't have much money, so I couldn't buy fresh packs of film. What I would buy was a 100-foot roll and roll my own film. Tear it up and roll some more. And he said, here, take some film. He gave me fresh packs of film. I said, oh my God. I said, okay, well, I have to get it processed. He said, no, don't wait. Just bring it back tomorrow. We'll process it here and we'll go through it. And that's what I did. And that's when I found out that he wasn't interested in seeing, photographers like to make prints to make big, whatever, to show you what they do. He said, I don't want to see prints. I only want to see the contact sheets because I want to see how you develop a thought. So there again, it told me that I finally found someone who knew how to approach photography in a very cerebral way. And during that whole summer, I learned from him essentially what one would learn to call as visual linguistics.
Okay.
So that's when I tell people when they ask me about me taking pictures, and I correct them. I don't take pictures. I
Okay.
make pictures because of my training. It's a whole different approach.
There's a whole.
So,
I'm sorry. So
well,
there's a whole thought and a whole science behind taking a picture. It's just not take you're not just taking a picture of an event or of something that is happening in the world. It is a whole thought process behind it, and there are elements in the picture that an average person is not thinking about when they see a picture. But as a photographer, you learn these things.
that's my approach. That's how I was trained.
Mm,
I'm always, um, one of the things that Mr. Rothstein said to me when we were talking, he said, "Well, what is it you want to say with the camera?" And that's a very important question to ask any photographer. Well, what is it
mm,
you want to say? So what's on your mind? How do you feel about stuff? Okay, but then now translate that into find a way to translate that into an image. Um, I've learned that I have another thing is what is my mission?
mm,
And that was something I had to figure out that summer because you had to say, well, why am I carrying this camera around? Well, what is this for? People carry a camera around for a lot of different reasons.
yeah.
But I was interested, I'd always been interested in trying to change using the camera to one, respect and appreciate the things that I think are worthy and important. And two, to use that image to change uh, people's perception about my people, to show that we're the fullness of our worth,
Hmm.
and to not only to our neighbors but also to ourselves. We need people who are battered and oppressed. Uh, need we all can benefit from reinforcement, positive reinforcement. We're very good at negative reinforcement, but
Yes.
positive reinforcement is something else that we don't see that often. But making an image of it makes it easier to digest and give people a picture of what it looks like. But we deserve it, and so my images are for the love of our people,
Hmm.
the faith in our ability. Those of us who have the ability to for discipline and mission oriented, to encourage them to keep doing that, to keep plugging. We need that. Those of us who have the desire for excellence, to keep
Hmm.
plugging, we need that.
Hmm.
Those of us who run across obstacles every day that tries to
Hmm.
shoot down our self-esteem, we need that.
Hmm.
And so I'm not the only one who do this. I mean, I thought Chet Ebony did a very good job, but somehow, and it doesn't matter who else, because we need hundreds of people on the front line. The job is too big for any one person. But as
Hmm.
one person, I try to do as much as I can.
Yeah, and when talk about the image, how powerful the images, those negative images are, when you uh, talk to a black person and or you bring up the history of black people or any people, they usually will revert back to those images of slavery. They'll revert back to those negative images that have for so long been pushed in in media and stuff and in educational books and so I think it is very important that we have people like you to reinforce the positive images and the dignity and that we all have as a people, the greatness of us as a people, because we get enough of the negative, especially with television programming. And I believe I read somewhere where it said that image sticks into your mind for a certain amount of time, but when they add the words to it, it stays even longer. So I do realize, and I don't think our people realize that those images that they see that are shoved down our face every day, they do affect us in how we feel about each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look at and then there's the negative lyrics
Oh yes.
in rap, especially
Hmm.
how it not only deforms the young people who listen to it, it further deforms. I mean, I wish there was a way to have a class action suit against all of those white executives who
Hmm.
demanded that the black rappers say all of the destructive and negative things about black people. Just like you have anti-Semitism, there should be a movement for anti-Africanism because
Hmm.
there should be a way to address these things as in a legal remedy. I'm
Hmm.
not the legal scholar to know how to do this, but it means that somebody has to think out of the box. And once
Yes.
this becomes it affects their pocketbook the same way that when Fox News libeled these voting machine people, and it affected their
Hmm.
pockets to billions of dollars, then people have a way of changing. And I just know there's got to be some bright kids out there, lawyer kids, legal with
Hmm.
legal minds, who can figure out a way that we can develop the structure to do a class action suit. It may involve first having Congress pass a law against it. I mean, Congress pass laws against being anti-Asian, against anti-Jewish. Everybody except us, and if we're a linchpin in the election, then we're not asking for enough. If we're not asking for that kind of legislation,
Right.
since we know it can be done. Just like we're not asking for legislation and treaty agreements between this country and Africa that's beneficial to Africa, as
Hmm.
opposed to the same ripoff behavior that we are doing. We're doing economic vampirism. This country on
Hmm.
Africa, but we African Americans are not really attuned to any of this because we, first of all, have been encouraged to put all our attention, what little attention we have, is on entertainment,
Yes.
not on what's in the books. So when
Yeah.
you have a house where you walk into that house and all you hear is television all day long, that tells you that there's no studying going on, that there's
Right.
nothing being put. Something is going through the ears, but nothing is stopping in between them. And so that's a culture, a value. Not everybody has to do, but it has to take hold in the culture, that we have to move away from being scared of God to being scared of not being in control of our tomorrows, and finding a way to make sure that education is important, that advancement is important, that self-investment is important,
Hmm.
and that control of our intellectual property is important. Look at the most valuable thing that when you talk about creativity, we
Hmm.
have produced the most valuable intellectual property, whether it's in
Hmm.
our writings, in our art, but definitely in our music. When you go
Yes.
in, you go into a place and you hear uh, these music companies playing stuff. What do you hear them playing? The
Yeah.
majority of what they're playing is Motown, or
Yep.
it's really international. It's R&B. It's
Yep.
not all this. It's not the craze at the time of the white entertainers who go by like flash. But the
Right.
black people know their spirit produces something that is immortal, that sticks behind, and
Hmm.
that's a lot of money that goes out of our community. So copywriting is important. Management
Hmm.
rights is important. They say show business is only 5% show and 95% business. Well, we're good at the 5%, but
Right.
we're not good at the 95%. We had no, most of us have no idea that another 95% exists. So it's a thing about how you see yourself. When you see yourself worthy and you have confidence in yourself, you begin to look around and say, wow, you know, these things that I'm touching have value. It's not just about look at me. It's not
Yeah.
just about, oh, wow, this white person think I'm okay. Fuck
Hmm.
that shit. Where's the money? Where's
Right.
the money? How do you monetize this? And then how do you keep the money? Because not how
Yes.
do you get the money and then just give it back to them, buying. How many Mercedes do you need? I mean, do you need a Mercedes? And how many,
Mhm.
watches do you need a gold watch? I mean,
Right. Right.
practicality, you
Right.
know. So you
Yeah.
say, yeah, I gotta, what is this bling? You
Yeah.
know, I've been photographing the tomb of a man who died 3,200 years ago, black man.
Hmm.
And in his tomb, they found over 350 pounds of gold.
Wow.
On today's market, that's over $7 million. And his tomb had been robbed. Most of the stuff had been robbed before it was discovered 100 years ago.
Mm.
Now, what kind of people were those people? They
Mm.
obviously thought a lot of themselves. So
Yes.
much so that they knew how smart they were. They even produced our calendar that we still use. They even produced the hours of the day that we still use. They produce the seasons that we still use. They produce mathematics that we still use. Now, I say that, and most people probably say, well, that nigga's crazy. He don't know what he's talking about.
Hmm.
Well, you know what? I did not know what I was talking about until I accidentally stumbled upon it in 1973. I went for an airline, TWA, which no longer exists, to do a travel brochure in a place I've never been to, Egypt. There is what this sounds kind of weird until you come upon the evidence.
Hmm.
And the evidence for me was walking into underneath a pyramid in the tomb of someone who died 5,000 years ago.
Hmm.
And in the walls of their tomb, this is not a grave. This is a grave, but it's a rich grave of a very
Okay.
rich person that can
Hmm.
build a tomb and then a pyramid on top of it. This tomb is walled by granite stones. And in these granite stones are chiseled literature. And this literature, as I began to have it translated, is actually 300 lines of Holy Scripture
Mm.
in 2500 BC. This is the earliest Holy Scripture ever to exist. And it was
Wow.
made by African people. And the tomb is called, and have your people write this down because I don't want people saying, oh, you had that guy on there, he didn't know what he's talking about. I want
Mm.
you all to Google this word. The word is UNAS. Unas. UNAS.
Hmm.
Unas
Hmm.
was a king. He was a very holy man. That's where these popes get their whole idea, is from the Egyptian kings, who they call pharaohs. A holy man. And in his holy man chamber, he took with him to the grave the beliefs that were central to his living. And in those beliefs, it talks about, in the chisel tomb, about creation. It talks about the mother of creation, a woman named Nut. It talks about soul, spirit,
Hmm.
which they call Ba and Ka. And it talks about death, the transition. And then something that comes about 2,500 years later, it talks about the ascension to heaven, which the
Mm.
Bible says would happen to Jesus. Now, and it talks about the beginnings of what later became the Ten Commandments. This is 2,500 years before the Bible. The Greeks learned that the African people are so spiritual They spend so much time on spirituality that, we can use this to control them. And that's what they did with the Bible. They they enlarged all of the scripture, the natural that had to do with divine nature, and they put sandwich personalities into it, like you say, the apostles and Moses and what have you. They sandwich personalities into it, and then they give it to us. Why? Because they have now developed what they call technology at that time, a tool of pacification. How do you overcome resistance in someone who I want to oppress? And the British was so upfront about it. And this Bible was made in 1452. When the Pope, since the Europeans were fighting so much with each other, 20-year wars, 100-year wars, and they're still doing it, said, look, guys, stop fighting. We'll give you, go be an explorer. And wherever you go, you can just take it. And the church is right behind you. That is called, please write this down. That is called the doctrine of discovery. 1452, the doctrine of discovery. It came out of the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. They couldn't govern themselves, but they said, hey, since we can't get together, you go take everybody else. And the doctrine of discovery says that anywhere you go in discovery, if there ain't Christians there, then you have the right to take everything. That's the doctrine of discovery.
Is this during the time that they shot the nose off of the Sphinx? Because I heard a story of them destroying the face of the Sphinx. Was this during that time?
That's later. That's the time. Who knows?
Okay.
But if the Greeks did it, but that story usually is later with the time of Napoleon.
Okay. Yes.
In the 1800s, because people saying, well, because you didn't have did you have cannons back then? That's the issue. Maybe you did, but but the Sphinx is tall, so you can't shoot it with a rifle. It has to be a cannon to shoot it off. Right. That's what happened. So the British, though, was so outlandish in taking this Bible that the Greek and the Portuguese had reformatted to be a tool of pacification. The British, when they sent their missionaries to Africa and to follow their slave ships to the Americas, they printed the book, and you can see it. You can see the front page of it on the web. And if you look up and write this down, the Slave Bible.
I've heard of that.
It exists. There are copies around. The Slave Bible, and it has been. We read it now. But the cover page has been changed. It's just now the Holy Bible, not the Slave Bible. And the Slave Bible is the one that has 52 mentions where slavery is okay. So here you have put our people into a trick bag. On one hand, you give us a story where liberation, freedom, is something that is entitled to people who suffer. And yes, our great-grandparents and great-great-greats suffered indeed. So therefore, they saw themselves in that suffering. It was meant to see them in that suffering so that you can then have to deal with the other passages of the Bible that says, thou shalt not rebel against thy master. So wait a minute, which one is which? So it's what I would call the original mind fuck.
I was going to ask about Egypt again, about, today, the people in Egypt, they claim to be the actual Egyptians, but we know that they are children of colonizers. What are your thoughts on that, when they try to separate Egypt from Africa and say it's in the Middle East?
Egyptology is the only science, so to speak, that's been developed for one purpose, and that's to separate the memory of Africa from African people. You don't have Greekology. You don't have Englishology. You have Egyptology with a purpose, and that purpose is to separate that memory from the people. So and
Mhm.
the Europeans had a problem. They couldn't, on one hand, suggest and say that African people are just genetically inferior. And then you have this great example along the Blue Nile, where the highest level of civilization and still all of the science information from sciences and medicine that you need and astrology that, that come out of that culture that you're still working with. So imagine if your narrative then to the people you were trying to enslave, if they knew that part about themselves, they may rebel a lot easier. So in order to make sure that that rebellion does
Mhm.
not happen, you have to separate it off. You have to say that Egypt is not a part of Africa.
Right.
We have to invent this whole new place called Middle East. Well, there's no law against claiming, but the evidence is against it because we know from the different invaders of Egypt that they came in after or around the seventh century. Um, so they can claim that they've been there since the seventh century, but the society was already they found a society that was already built, just like the Persian found a society already built, like the Greeks
Mhm.
found, and Macedonians found it, like the Romans
Mhm.
found it, and I dare, so what it points out that here they are in possession of all of the remains of ancient Egypt,
Yeah.
whether we like it or not. Whoever's fought and taken the country back is in possession of it. And as
Mhm.
people who are in possession of it, they have the freedom to do with it what they will. We can't really change that. We may know the difference, but they have the power to push this identity lie for their own purposes.
Mhm.
And the main purpose is that Arabs have been antagonistic to black people. Anywhere in the world, you must realize that it's
Mhm.
okay to hate black people. There's no with impunity. There's no punishment for it. I
Mhm.
don't care if you're in Asia, India, Europe, or on the Saudi Peninsula. And in fact, the Arabs were the first to start doing slave trading with our people from the East African coast. We don't talk about it that much because most of
Yeah.
us West African from part of West African Exodus, but the East
Mhm.
African Exodus was only by Arabs, and you don't have and there's yet you cannot find anywhere in history an Arab abolitionist. And how they treated people were different, yes, but they are the word concubine or the word eunuch is their word, and it's their word because when they took the African men, historians say and people say that what they did to prevent the African root taking hold, they emasculated the men. They castrated the men. That's how you got eunuchs. The women were okay. They were the African women were okay for Arab men to sleep with and have children with, and you even see some high-ranking Saudis who look black, who come from
Right.
black mothers, but they
Mhm.
don't have black fathers. They have Arab fathers. Um,
Mhm.
so it's a different kind. They have a different, and they call still black people Bilal, which is the Islamic word for slave,
Mhm.
because they said that the slave Bilal is the one who was the musician, essentially the chanter for the messenger to call people to worship. So that it's a down, a low down the pole. It may
Mhm.
seem like it's high at the pole, but it's not. So and then the Egyptians they do have a domestic problem because they are mostly Muslims. 10% of them are Christians, still Arabs.
Mhm.
But because most of them are Muslims, Islam teaches you that you should, just like the Jews teach their people, there should be no graven images. The
Okay.
Jews have no graven images of a god, so their god, the only graven thing you will find is a crown that goes on top of the Torah. That the Torah is the key. So the Arabs have a conflict here. First of all, they never cared about any of this stuff until white people started caring about it. In fact, up until the time of Farouk, who built the Suez Canal, white people could easily get anything they wanted out of Egypt in terms of the artifacts because the Arabs cared nothing about it. So that's why, and then that's how they filled up the museums in Italy, in France, in England, in Russia, all in America, because they were saying, yeah, take it, get rid of it. Because in their mind, where they have been taught, this is not of Islam. This is something that is idol worship. So now that so fast forward, you have now a very politicized Islamic population. And the most politicized of them is called the Brotherhood. And the Brotherhood, when they were in power, they even brought up the issue about dynamiting all of the temples and all of the structures because it was not of Allah.
Oh, wow.
Now, this, from their point of view, it's a legitimate point of view. But then the government began to realize that they are not as rich as they thought they would be because the Egyptians keep multiplying in numbers. But at the same time, they found out that European tourists were willing to come and spend a lot of money just to see this open air museum. So much so that now the tourism gives the government a third of its income. So the government has to figure out, oh, okay, wait up, guys. It's not that we don't disagree with you, that this stuff is anti-Islam, but this stuff is making us a lot of money to help so that we can help put bread on your table. So what they decided to do to make people, their children, emotionally attached to this work, this you can't get rid of, it's in your presence. It's like seeing two realities side by side, the living of the people and then the monuments of those people who are gone. So they in their schools, they now teach their children that these are our ancestors. And they do this because they want them to have an emotional connection that overrides the political, the religious duty to destroy it. So in that's where we're at, and that's where they're at. If they knew how to read maps, they would realize they're on the continent of Africa. If they knew how to read time and history, they would realize that they are latecomers. But being that they are the caretakers, they have been doing a lot of, I must say, a lot of great stuff to preserve it. They made a U-turn to not caring and letting everybody have it, to now caring and realizing they have a vested interest in it. Now, that's one thing. But they, as Arabs, still hate Black people. They do not want to be associated with Black people in any way, shape, or form. They do not want to be considered African in any way, shape, or form. So this is where they're at, and that's probably what led to, and I wonder how many of your people realize that Egypt almost wanted to go to war with Ethiopia 3 or 4 years ago over the fact that Ethiopia decided to build a dam on the Nile. How many of you are aware of this? The water from the Nile, it comes in two directions, what's called the Blue Nile and the White Nile. The White Nile begins in Rwanda border with the Congo, comes up through Lake Victoria, comes up through South Sudan onto Egypt. The Blue Nile starts in Ethiopia, 6,000 feet above sea level, and drops down the the trench. That's why the Nile goes north. The only river in the world that goes north, and that's why. But the other significant thing here is that 85% of the water that reaches Egypt comes out of Ethiopia. Now, a lot of it, there's a bigger lake in what's called the river states in Africa where the White Nile congregates. So actually, the White Nile should be having more water coming out than the Blue Nile. But there's a problem. the Creator made a problem. The water on the White Nile in Sudan, runs into a 500-mile swamp. It's on the map. Look it up. S-U-D-D, Sud, a swamp. Now, why is that important? Because the swamp takes all of that water, more water that comes out of Ethiopia, and it stops it. It's kind of like what, the Old Testament's done to the history of Africa. It stops it. And that water sits there, but it evaporates into the clouds. And the clouds take the wind going east, take those clouds over to the mountains of Ethiopia, which starts at 15,000 feet above sea, 6,000 feet, ends at 15,000 feet above sea level. Takes it over to the mountains of Ethiopia, where it then rains for 3 months solid, day and night.
Wow.
That water it's a concept called transpiration. That water falls on the mountains of Ethiopia, collects in the sea they call Lake Tana, interior sea, Lake Tana, and that's the water that comes down and floods the Nile. That's the water that brings the nutrients out of Ethiopia that in the days before the high dam energized the land, the desert, and made it grow. That's the 85% water that Egypt, when Ethiopia decided they want to put a dam on that river, Egypt wanted to go to war. They said, you stop one drop of water and we will go to war because that will impact the lives of one Egyptian. That water belongs to Egypt, they said. It's not yours. How can water that didn't start in your country belong to you? But this has been part of the whole idea of people who occupy. The British started it by trying to say and make an agreement, the Nile River Agreement, and the Egyptian government to this day will say to you, the Nile River Agreement gives us the right to this water forever. And what the Nile River Agreement did, the British got every one of their countries who they will colonize to agree. But who did not agree? Ethiopia. Haile Selassie refused to sign this treaty because he knew that water was here, but he didn't have the power. He didn't have the money to make it happen. The same dam they just built, look it up. Please write this down. Every Black person should know about this. It's called the GERD, G-E-R-D, the largest dam in Africa, GERD. The Haile Selassie had an idea, same idea to build this dam, same place. But when he didn't have the money, so he tried to go to the international banks, the IMF, the World Bank. He got blocked by the Egyptians. The Egyptian diplomatic corps blocked the approval of those loans. Only in 20 years ago, a new person comes to power, Meles Zenawi, and Meles comes up with the idea, we're not going to beg anybody for this dam. We're going to raise this money ourselves. We're going to make bonds just for this dam, and only Ethiopians can buy it. Nobody else can buy it. I couldn't buy it. They kept everybody else out. It took them a decade to do it, but they raised the $6 billion in their own money to do it. They then went with that design that Haile Selassie had. They found an Italian construction company to build it. They found Chinese companies that build the generators, and the Egyptians kept screaming, don't build it, don't build it. You got to get an agreement from us. We have to approve this. The Ethiopians says, fuck you. This is our water. This is not your water. And we're going to contain it, and we're going to make it work for us. And we're going to use electricity to industrialize ourselves. We are a poor country. What separates us is energy. And we have all this energy here, and we're going to use it. And we're going to industrialize our country, and then we're going to do something else. This dam is going to create so much electricity that is going to become a cash crop. What I mean by that, they are going to use high voltage transmission lines, and they're going to make lines to go to Uganda, to Kenya, to all their neighbors, to Sudan, and they're going to sell their excess electricity. This is for the benefit of our people that we have saved and made it possible. Thank you very much, Egypt, for not for preventing us from finding world financing. We found it ourselves. Thank you very much, Egypt, for saying that this water is yours, but you can't stop it. We're the ones who can stop it. And then one day, what the Egyptians and the Egyptians didn't like that because it made them realize that they were beholden to Black people. The same people they despise, they're now beholden because they're in the desert and they can only live because that water comes in there. And that water comes out of everywhere in all the countries in Africa where the Nile runs, it's in Black African countries. They had to acknowledge that. They didn't know whether, as we say in the South, they didn't know whether shit or go blind to have to acknowledge this particular reality that they had been able to not have to acknowledge for so many hundreds of years. But their real fear, and rightly so, if you have water, you have control of water. We in this country do the same thing. When you get your water, is it free?
No.
How do people know to charge you? For how much? They have a water meter.
Okay.
That's what Egypt is afraid of. That's their existential threat. That once Ethiopia gets its political and military footing, they will put a water meter on their ass. Now, they've already been collecting water since the time of Nasser in what's called the Nasser Dam, the high dam that the Russians helped them build. This dam is 1,000 miles long, 20 stories deep, and that's their reservoir. So it's rich of them to say that you're building your dam is going to deny something of us. You got this huge reservoir that you've been collecting for almost 60 years. What are you talking about? Yeah. But at some point in the future, some Ethiopian government is going to decide that you have to start paying us for our water. They know that. They don't want to acknowledge that. But that's coming down the pike. You and I may be dead when it happens, but it will happen. They have a choice then. They have a choice. They can either not pay or they can blow it up. And if they blow it up, they'll wash themselves out into the Mediterranean Sea.
It should be like when you said that, like all of the Black lands is where all of this water is coming from. And everybody has a right to be able to, especially poorer countries that actually have, ways to finance their countries, that everyone has a right to use their natural resources.
And it just
seems so crazy to me.
But that's a colonized approach. You can either say, but it's up to you to respond to that. Do I want to act like a colonized person, or do I want to act like that I own myself? Right. And and there are costs for that. But the Ethiopians, have always stood up. They're the only country in Africa that does not have Independence Day. You know why? They had nobody to liberate them. No white country ever controlled them. So they don't need an Independence Day to be free from white rule. They've always had their rule. And they are the most, I respect those people more than any other Black person as a country, how they do their business. They feel that there's no white person that's equal to them. They are the original. And they know how to, and they understand power. They understand the management of power, and they do it. And they understand the management of their society and their culture. And they do it very well. They are people to take lessons from.
And because these people have never been colonized, the Ethiopians, and how you said they don't feel there is no colonizer that is equal to them. Do you feel that is something that we're missing as Black people in America? Whereas we have as we spoke about it earlier, the negative self-imagery, and we, in some ways, we may feel inferior in some ways. not necessarily that we are, but we may feel that way. Whereas we have, people like the Ethiopians that they feel that they are better than everybody. They have that self-confidence built in.
Well, we have absorbed. We have become what the Bible wanted us to become.
Excuse me.
Become so pacified and spooked about ourselves.
Mhm.
The Ethiopians are Christians too, but the Ethiopians have a sense of their father's land that they walk on, that nobody has a right to it but them. And they also have the history of having slaughtered 10,000 Italian soldiers back in 1881 80, who invaded their country. And they invaded that country with weapons more superior than the Ethiopians. So the Ethiopians had to use the knowledge of their geography in order to defeat them. Here you have a mechanized army with cannons and rifles. And essentially, Ethiopians had muskets. They're a poor country. And they're invading your country. And it was 25,000. And the Ethiopians figured out how to slaughter all of them, being outgunned. And this is how they did it. They planted spies among the Italians who convinced the Italians that they were double agents, and who then came up with a strategy. The Ethiopian generals came up with a strategy that the only way we can defeat these people is that we have to render their weapons powerless. And how do they do that? They said, okay, we want these people to march. Ethiopia's a hilly country, mountainous country. They tell their spies, march them along this particular route to get to us. Because they knew that in that route, they were going to run into a cul-de-sac. And when they did, all of their guys who had nothing but sticks and spears and musket guns suddenly appeared at the top of the mountain and descended upon them from all sides. Mm-hmm. Immediately, that made the cannons useless. A cannon cannot shoot up. Mm-hmm. Immediately, that made everybody else, all the other Italian soldiers, freak, because they knew they didn't have that level of support anymore that they had that faith in. They just only had their rifles. And the Ethiopians also had swords. So immediately it became a sword fight. And immediately, at the end of the day, the Ethiopians had slaughtered 25,000 white people. And it shook Europe to its core when the front pages says it's Italy defeated by Ethiopia. Never happened before. Never. Who are these people? How could they do this? And you've never heard about it, have you?
I haven't heard about it. I said, that's amazing.
Well, then let's write this down. Let's write this down. This is a battle, very famous battle. It's called the Battle of Adwa. 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 Everybody, go to the Google this, the Battle of Adwa, and you'll find these names of Menelik and Ras Maskonnen, who was a field commander. You'll find this history there. There's even films made of it now by the Ethiopians. That's why the Ethiopians know that they have earned their right to their freedom, because they didn't just lay down when the great white master says, I'm coming after you. They didn't say, oh my God, I'm spooked. I'm going to lay down. There's nothing I can do. No.
Yeah.
They looked at the situation, and they have, with belief in themselves, that nobody is going to liberate you but yourself, buddy. They took that responsibility to liberate themselves. They looked at the enemy. They looked at what they had that they could work for them, what was working against them, and they pulled it, they skewed it. They were able to skew it because they had double agents giving their intelligence information that they wanted them to have. They thought ahead of this game. They weren't just waiting to meet here. They thought ahead of it. Mm-hmm. That's what gives them freedom. That's what gives them confidence.
Well said. Now, while we're talking about the Ethiopians, I wanted to bring up the book because
please.
I just wanted to say I got the book.
Okay, Sacred Nile.
Sacred Nile. I got the book. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
One of my favorite pictures in the book
Yes.
is the sunset on the lake Ashange. How do you say the word?
Ashinge. The Lake
Ashinge.
Ashinge, yes.
Ashinge.
In the Simeon Mountains. Yes, in the Simeon Mountains.
in the different hues. I mean, the photography is just amazing. And as I'm looking through it, I'm like, I start to notice the dates, and I'm like, I didn't even know these were different dates. And like, this is 1980, and then this is 2008. That's how good the photography is. That's how good it is. So I just wanted to say that off top. And then, I learned something about, Christianity coming to Ethiopia in the 4th century.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things.
That's how we get Sheba, in the Bible, they have the story of Sheba. First of all, can I say, everybody, please go to the website,
yes,
sacrednile.com. Sacrednile.com. So Sheba is a story that's in the Bible of where a female ruler of Ethiopia makes a visit to Jerusalem to visit Solomon. And that's and the Bible says that, and it talks about Solomon's or the biblical scholars talking about her visit. What they didn't talk about, and the Ethiopian historians talk about, is that on that visit, Solomon, being the philanderer that he was, were able to he and the queen Makeda, that's the Ethiopian name for her, Makeda, Sheba. Had sex, and when she went back home, she produced a child. Now, Sheba was a ruler who ruled in the faith of her fathers, which was in the faith of divine nature. And there are monuments still in the ancient royal city of Aksum that speaks to this. The son became of age. He went to visit. His mother let him go see his father. His father grew very attached to him. But then people of the court after a while became suspicious and jealous of the attention the father was giving, because Solomon had many sons. And they insisted that he send this kid back home to his mother. And according to the Ethiopian history of the rulers, which they have a book, they call it the Kabri Nagash. It's called Kebre, Kabri Nagash, Negash, which means the glory of the kings. In this book on the glory of the kings, they said that when he was sent back home, before he was sent back home, after the royal courts, people of Solomon kept imploring him to do this, Solomon in his great wisdom did this. He said, okay, if I must send my son back home to his mother, then you must send your firstborns with him to help set up a Hebraic state. So Solomon felt either that'll be the end of it or the beginning of something. So they submitted to this. The priests and class submitted to this, and they said, "Okay, we'll send our sons with him." And the sons were very troubled about this because they had been raised in an atmosphere where they were taught that Israel rather, is safe because the Ark of the Covenant resides in the temple of Israel. So some sons came up with a great idea, and their idea was to make a replica of the Ark. And knowing the schedule of the temple, they knew that they would be far away before the discovery would be made that it was a replica. And that's what happened, according to the Kabri Nagash. Menelik I left, who was called Hakim at the time. Menelik is a royal name, left Israel on his way back. And then I guess when he gets to Yemen, he discovers that the secret is out, that they have the Ark of the Covenant with them, and they have this huge big celebration. It's called the Dance of David. The priests do this dance yearly now, the Dance of David. And they brought the Ark to Ethiopia. Now, interestingly enough, the Ethiopians have always said that Ark has been in Ethiopia since this is before 324. That's Christianity. This is a Jewish thing, has always been in Ethiopia and has moved around a different place for its safety. No Jewish person or no Jewish records or books ever talk about where the Ark of the Covenant could be. I guess there's the assumption that when the Temple of Jerusalem was plundered by the Romans, that caused the first Jewish diaspora, which coined the word not roving, but that was somehow destroyed and nobody ever knew about it. But the Ethiopians say they've always had it, and they still have a building. They say that is the treasury, that it is in that building. And then later Christianity came at 324 because of some merchants from the Middle East, Armenian merchants who were able to convert the royal family. And then it was a top-down situation. So the royal family then converted and dictated to the priests that they do this, and the old Jewish religion was dissolved. So Sheba dissolved the old religion of the sky, a divine nature. Her son brought in the Jewish religion. And then in 324, I think the name of the king was Izana. And Izana dissolved, and you see coins made by Izana. And the way we know this is he was the guy who made the difference, is that we have been able to find coins that are made by Izana that has their crescent moon and the sun on it, which meant they believed in the divinity of nature. And then in this, before he dies, you see coins where above him is the cross. So we know that because of that, he is the emperor of transition of that particular period.
Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of history in Sacred Nile. You cover a lot
Our
of
history.
You
Our
cover
history.
Right. You cover a lot of different areas. So you've been a lot of different places in the continent. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah. I've been traveling on the continent since 1971. Every year, except 3 or 4 years. Every year, I spend at least in the beginning, in the 70s, I spent summers. I spent the summer of 72, 73 in Ghana, 74 in Senegal. And then I started working with the paper, and my time was limited because of vacation. But I found a way to extend that so that after 10 years, I figured out how to spend 6 weeks at a time on my vacations in Africa. And that's how I do my research. And I find that actually, I tell every African-American, please go to Africa. And I say to them, if you feel first time, you don't speak any other language, go to Ghana. They speak English. They speak their local language, but they speak English. And they are very friendly. And you will just have a ball of a time. You have a great time. But I tell you that you will discover what I've discovered about going to Africa. It's cheaper than therapy. Here I'm in a reality where I'm in the majority. I don't stick out because of the color of my skin. If somebody dislikes me, it's because of something that my behavior, not my color. And by being in a majority where everybody looks like you, is very healthy. It's the most healthiest thing that you can do for yourself. You can't. It's the best emotional sauna that you can give to yourself. But don't take my word for it. Go to Ghana and find out for yourself. Take a week. Then I'm sure the next time you want to take 2 weeks or you want to take 3 weeks, go to Ghana. Go hang out with your cousins. I don't say brothers. I say cousins, because we all got cousins and we all can relate to our cousins. These are your cousins. Go hang out with your cousins. Come back and see how it changes you, how it affects you. And then you'll understand why I have been going to Africa every year since 71.
I had my eye. I had been looking at Aswan.
Yes.
The area of where Nubia.
Yep.
And it's definitely something I want to do. It's definitely something I want to do.
Good.
Definitely.
Good. You're going to love it. And Aswan, it's interesting you say Aswan because Aswan has a special kind of flavor to it. And because of just where it's located. But Aswan also is a place where you find the Black people in Egypt. They are in Aswan, the Nubians. These are the Nubians that the Egyptians back in the 50s, Nasser displaced. Displaced is a very nice word for it. But when Egypt got independence, Sudan was bigger than it is now. But part of the Sudanese people lived in southern Egypt, and they wanted to be their own country. They wanted to have political liberation. And Nasser, being a military man, decided that if he flooded them out, then they no longer exist as a political entity. And that's one of the calculations that became the reasons for building the high dam as big and high as it is. Now those people have nowhere to go. They were forced out. And they were forced out and brought up to live in Aswan. And it's a very interesting place. When I go there every year, there's 2 different schools where the Nubian kids go to. And I go and I try to make the biggest contribution I can to those schools, because education, we know education is the life jacket out of this misery. Mm-hmm. But also in Egypt, you don't have public schools, you have private schools.
Oh, okay.
If you get to college, then it's public, it's paid for. But getting up to college is something that your parents have to pay your school uniform for and your school fees. And the economy is very hard in Egypt. So that thousands of kids can't go to school because their parents can't afford $10 a month. So I go and I try to drop as much money on the school's principals as I can to make a fund that they can then send, and they can afford to go out and grab 100 kids who can't go to school and put them in school and educate them. And I just, it's all I can do, but I think it's the right thing to do. And I feel good when I do it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. It definitely looks like a different type of culture there. I believe is the name Elephantine, the ancient name for that area, or am I mixing it up?
The Elephantine Island area.
Elephantine, yeah.
Elephantine.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I didn't. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and as in everything in Egypt, everything has history. And Elephantine, when I went to Ethiopia and I start seeing the Ethiopian Jews, well, they don't call themselves Jews. That's a European terminology. They call themselves Hebrews. But I asked them, I said, well, how did you get here? Well, some would say we got here with the Sheba message I just gave you. And others will say we got here through the Nile, because the Sheba route is through the Red Sea, on the Saudi Arabia side. And also, you can cross Egypt by the Sinai. Before the canal was built, there was this still 200-mile bridge that connects Egypt to Africa, to Asia, the Middle East, which meant that, I say another fantasy about the Bible is that Moses had no need to go through the water because there's a 200-mile land bridge that everybody else was using back and forth. So the Egyptian Hebrews say, well, some of the people came from the southern part of Egypt, and they mean Elephantine, Aswan, because during the time of the Persian invasion, the Egyptian king had hired a mercenary army of Jews to guard the southern border. When the Persians invaded, the local population was very resistant because invasions meant that their life would be thrown asunder and they would become refugees and have to go south. When they found out that the Jewish garrison was all happy about this, they rioted against the Jewish garrison and burned them out. And they had to become refugees, and the only way they could go was south themselves. And the Ethiopians say some of those people are their people. But we have
I've read of that before. Something similar, like about the Persians and their invasions.
The Great Exodus is not the story of the Jewish Exodus. We have had 3 great Exodus. The Egyptian first Exodus is the invasion by the Hyksos in the north, coming over the 200-mile land bridge
Mhm.
invading the country and forcing the people in the north around Memphis to become refugees and go south. 100 years later, they successfully, but they didn't go into the channel of the Nile, where the Theban rulers were. About less than 100 years later, they rushed and they engaged the Thebans military and kings, and they defeated them.
Mhm.
And then you had a major exodus out of the country, going south into Abydos, into Sudan, Nubia. And then the third exodus comes from the time of the Persians. So, and where did those people go? They went down the Nile. It was easier to go along the White Nile because it was level as opposed to going uphill to Ethiopia. And those people took the major rivers, the Niger River, all of them, and landed up eventually in West Africa. And we know this is the case because they brought with them their culture. The
Mhm.
Dogon brought with them the calendar of the Egyptians. They brought with them the belief system of the Egyptians, the belief
Mhm.
in one God. They brought with them the ministers or the managers who helped the Egyptians, who represented the different forces of nature. It's all
Mhm.
there. So then the fourth Exodus, guess what? Is the Arabs taking us? The fifth Exodus is the Europeans taking us. These are the five great exodus of African people that we don't even have any idea that has
Mhm.
happened to us. And that it puts it's a story of reality, not a story of fantasy like the Exodus story in the Bible.
So when we look at West Africa, we have a lot of people who, I wouldn't say Jew, I would say they have Hebraic type of lifestyle. Uh, the Bambara, for instance, which a lot of Bambara went to Louisiana in the transatlantic slave trade. Um, there was a Jewish guy, I can't remember his name. He's the author of a book called Bambara, where he discovered that some of the language actually had Hebrew words in it,
Okay.
and some of the way that their lifestyle was, and how they were pastoral people. And What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on these different groups in West Africa, going down to the Congo area, having Hebraic customs?
Well, there are priest class, and they have carry with them a certain chromosome from the Egyptian time. When people, you
Okay.
have to remember, when the Bible talks about 12 tribes, they weren't all white. They had to be all black.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a white one, who knows? But then they carry this Y chromosome that you see that shows up in Uganda, the Cameroons, Nigeria.
Mm.
So I'm not surprised that the Bambara had a priest class. The Ghanaians have a priest class. They're called the Airway people.
Mm.
And the fact that we even had Islamic scholars who were enslaved, who showed up in this country
Mm.
and kept their records. But the fact remained is that their life was shifted.
Yes.
They could not maintain their culture, but their blood maintained their identity, and that's how we know that they're there. But I say to people that when you look at the Ethiopian Hebrews, I do that specifically for a couple of reasons: to let you know that they exist, but also
Mm.
to help you reconfigure or reframe what a tribe of Israel looks like.
Mm.
That they do not look. There may have been Ashkenazis, but that's a majority, a minority, not the majority. The majority had to have been African,
They had to have been black.
had to have been black. So
Yeah.
you have the Sephardims who are blacker, and they say,
Mhm.
well, their blackness is because they lived with African people. They stayed behind, but they are representative, and the Africans that we come across who have that right chromosome, uh, confirms the fact that these African tribes existed, and that is them who were the holy ones. And that's what Sacred Now is about, trying to show you that we have invented the whole concept of holiness. Our people invented the first concepts of a terminology of conversation with the divine. Our people were the first to come to make a construction based upon astrological concepts of divine nature that was brought down to give us an understanding of who we are, where we are, and how do we maintain our sense of order. All of that came from African people. We have been propagandized and brainwashed to think that purity and that sacredness is a white thing. Look at every black church. What is color is Jesus Christ? He ain't black. Jesus didn't get black until Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel.
That's correct.
You can go through Europe and you can see black Madonnas all over the place because black was the color of sacredness and holiness coming out of Egypt. The black Madonna is the replica of Isis, who had the first impossible birth. So we just don't know. This stuff is hidden from us. And once you learn the truth, you can confront all these people who are throwing scripture, these racists whose mouths are full of scripture and their hearts are full of hate, thinking that they belong and that they have these rights that they do not really have, but because we don't have the evidence to point to them. And that's what I did with Sacred Now. It took me 5 decades of first unfolding this tangle and then trying to find what the evidence is so that you at home can look at the evidence. I didn't make it up. It's not Photoshop. And you can then make a trip if you want, if you so desire. You can go to Egypt and you can go and find these pictures, these places, and you will know what it means. You can go to Sudan, find these pictures in these places. And you can go to Ethiopia, find these pictures in these places. And the necklace has been put together for you. So that you can stand now and confront this ungodly person who is trying to tap dance on your head with their bullshit.
And I must say that Sacred Nile is so well put together. I done read a lot of books, and I usually go into books for specific information and try to find some nuggets of truth. Sacred Nile, the way it's put together, I think for the reader is very concise. It's very understandable. To me, it's an easy read, very understandable, and the photographer, the pictures are beautiful. Like you just get pulled in by. I was saying to myself, those pictures, they look like as if an artist could just repaint them, and they're just works of art, literally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, our people deserve no better, no less.
I agree. So I just want to thank you, Mr. Chester Higgins. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity once again. I don't want to run too long, and I hope that we can do something again. Maybe we can have a discussion again if you have the time.
I'd love to take the time. I'd like to just leave this parting word. Long before there was history, there was African history.
And let me just plug real quick. Make sure you get Sacred Nile, and you could add to where they can get it.
Come to the website sacrednile.com. You can order the book, sacrednile.com. You can see other interviews, you can read reviews, you can see pictures, but get on the computer, type in sacrednile.com. Thank you.
And thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Higgins, I appreciate it. And yeah, hope we can get together again. And
absolutely.
I'll see you soon.
Okay.
See you soon.
Hey, what's good, fam? If you like that video that you just saw, or you like something that I said, or you appreciate the type of content that I produce, then make sure to go subscribe to the channel. Hit that subscribe button so that you can be notified anytime I make a video, and keep it black and authentic. Also, for the brothers and sisters that would like to donate to help me produce better content, you can support me at Cash App. That's $Black Authentic. All right, $Black Authentic. And for the brothers and sisters that would like to get this hot shirt or any shirt that I wear, you can find that at blackauthentictruth.com. You can support me that way also. I got different styles of shirts to choose from, all designed by me, the Wagga Bar. So get you a shirt today. I appreciate all the brothers and sisters that rock with me, and from the top of my chest, keep it black and authentic. Thank you.